trash collectors and buy trucks, or he could contract it out.
Well, Councilmember Miller.
I would like to reconcile, if we're trying to determine what was in the minds of the people that wrote the charter, 440I, where it says specifying in detail probable expenditures, and then you go to 370 E1, and it discusses the whole specific line items without disapproving. It's talking about financial matters. So I'm wondering if they took the time to have very specific detail about line items that are vetoed and overridden, wouldn't it lend itself to the idea that the detail being specified in the budget would go down to that level? Like, why would the writers of the charter go into that level of detail about line items and yet not have intended for them to be discussed?
I think that the ordinance will have line items in it, and presumably the mayor is not going to disapprove anything that was in his original budget. So I think the concept is that you have this division of power among these two branches where the mayor provides council with his budget, then council can amend that budget, adding or deleting programs, increasing amounts or decreasing amounts. And so then you have an appropriation ordinance that has line items in it. Now, your last two appropriation ordinances, they adopted the budget for purposes of the appropriation of funds by reference, and then they specified in line items, if you will, line items in the appropriation ordinance, the changes that council was desiring to make. So in those past 2 years, the appropriation ordinance had 5 to 9 different items, and then those are the changes that you identified that you made for purpose of appropriating funds for the various programs and items. Now, then the mayor can approve those items or disapprove specific line items, and then it goes back to the council to see if anything that he disapproved, you want to override that disapproval, override that veto. Now, in that Owens case we were talking about earlier with the head notes in the long bill that limited the powers of the governor to move money around within departments, what that case said was there was an objection about did the governor have to veto, or could the governor veto those specific head notes? And it's kind of maybe only lawyers really appreciate this, but the court said he can't veto those because those weren't line items, okay? But at the same time, they said those head notes were void and of no effect because they violated the separation of powers between the branches. And so although the governor couldn't veto those head notes, he didn't have to comply with those. So I would say that possibly the same thing could happen here. If you had something that was beyond the council's authority and you listed it as a line item, and let's say he vetoed it and you overrode the veto, there's a legal question there. There's a legal question there, because if it violated the separation of powers, then the override of the veto would be void. If it was within the power of the city council, then that would be valid, and he would be bound to only spend that money as authorized or not spend it at all.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess the legal question I'm asking, though, is in 370E1, the implication is there that when we return the budget, it has specific line items, because otherwise, how could the mayor disapprove specific line items if they weren't there?
I agree.
And so if we're submitting that, the appropriation ordinance with line item detail, how do we have the information in order to do that? with what's been given. And maybe, I guess, I'll stand by for more on that. I just don't understand how the level of detail that we have right now would allow 370E1 to be accomplished.
Well, if you've looked at the budget and there's money for a program, recreational sports in the Parks and Recreation Department, and you put a line item in there increasing it by X amount of dollars, then there's a line item that the mayor can approve or disapprove. And if he disapproves it and it comes back here and you override that veto, then it goes into effect. As far as having the information you need or feel you need to make these decisions is something, beyond the legal argument per se, and it's something, again, that I'm going to need to defer to Ms. Newman on.
Would you give me a legal opinion, in your opinion, whether or not a major legislative budget determination can have more than one item in it?
Can you give me an example?
Inside a program or department, we could have a major legislative budget determination that said parks watering is a priority. In addition to that, mowing lawns is a priority, or we could list 3 or 4 things and make it all a major legislative budget determination.
President King, if you're asking me where I would come down on those, I would say I don't think that they meet that rule of reason. I don't think that those are major legislative determinations. I think if the council's view is that parks watering has been neglected and the maintenance of parks as a result has suffered, then you make your major legislative determination that you're going to increase parks funding for parks maintenance by X dollars. I think that council is always free to explain why it's increasing the amount, but the mayor is not stuck with your whys. He just deals with the appropriation, so that if you appropriate for a program, I don't know that just saying something is a legislative determination is going to make it so.
Well, I think the issue is, at one place we are asked to do things in general and not in detail, and then in another place we are given the opportunity to do a line item veto. So it seems to me like we're inconsistent in our approach. So if we are going to do things by the 5 departments, it would seem to me like one line item could include 5 to 6 things for that department, and it would be considered one major legislative budget determination. And it could have 8 to 10 things that come up to 500,000 or $1 million or $2 million, and those items would be considered a major legislative budget determination. That way, I think we're playing in a level playing ground. You're doing it by departments, and we would take everything in that department and we would make one line item, and we would say there are 10 things that create this one line item, and they are a major legislative budget determination.
I don't agree. President King, I think that some of the things you're mixing in there are not strictly programs. While I think that council could, for example, say, we're going to make a major legislative determination that parks should be increased in its funding for parks maintenance by $500,000. And the reasons we feel it's appropriate, you can state somewhere your reasons, because we think it needs more money for watering the grass, and we think it needs more money for mowing the yards and fertilizer, and we think that you should hire 2 more groundskeepers. Then the major legislative determination, as we've interpreted the charter, as far as we're able to, given that there are some gray areas, is that the program of parks maintenance, you can make that determination as to that it needs $500,000 more. And if council wants to gratuitously express how it came up with that 500,000 and what it would like the money to be used for, you can do that as well. But once you increase the money for the program, it's not within the council's purview to say it has to be spent on X employees and so much for operating expenses, because that's the purview of the executive to determine how he's going to do the program, how he's going to give you better parks maintenance.
Well, I think the issue that is frustrating for us is when we came to what a major legislative budget determination was, we had one time said we thought that should be $7 million in stormwater improvements, O&M, and capital construction, and we were subsequently, I guess, that is not determined to be a major legislative budget determination to say that, because it's could be in multiple departments or it could be in multiple programs. And so maybe the easiest way for us to function as a council is to say, we believe we want 5 million or whatever the number is for stormwater, and you go and we will cut 2 to 5% out of every one of the programs or departments to facilitate that, and you are then responsible to find the way to find that money, as opposed, because that would be a major legislative budget determination. And so it's, I think, reason why we came to this conclusion of this letter that we sent the mayor was we felt there's no middle ground on this particular issue. If we are going to have a issue that comes before us and make it a major legislative budget determination, maybe it's 10 items put together in one, or it's a single item, but if he has line item veto, it seems to me like every line that goes into the budget has to have an ability to be a major legislative budget determination.
Well, keep in mind, though, that section of Charter 370 just says in any ordinance appropriating funds, the mayor has a line item veto. So whatever line items you put into the appropriation is what is subject to the veto. If there are no disagreements with parts of the budget, they don't go into the appropriation ordinance.
Right,
President King, part of what you said, you indicated if the council were to say, stormwater management is very important to us. We want to add a program called stormwater management and appropriate $7 million to be used only for stormwater management. I would be very hard-pressed, I think anyone would be hard-pressed, to say that's not a major legislative determination, okay? So you can, in that appropriation ordinance, put $7 million for stormwater management. Now, the other part of, as you ended your statement, when you were talking about the little line items of the budget, all the items in the budget, I would have to strongly disagree with you on that. Now, if you want to appropriate $7 million for stormwater management, and there's only so much revenue, and you can't raise the mill levy because of tabor limitations, then something has to be cut. And I would suggest that, as in, all of the issues that face branches of government, that the best solution, again, is the dialogue between council and the administration to say, if we appropriate $7 million for stormwater, how would we do this? How would be the best method of not hurting the other departments? Because it gives the administration an opportunity to work with you. But if the administration said, we're not going to tell you, and the council said, okay, then we've got our 5 buckets, and we will just decrease the appropriations for 4 of those buckets or 3 of those buckets by X dollars a piece or X percent a piece. Reading the charter, I can't say that you can't do that.
That would be a major legislative budget determination.
Well, that would be the major legislative budget determination, at least, clearly would be appropriating $7 million for adding a stormwater management program and appropriating $7 million for it.
Right.
Now, how the money gets spent, again, you can't really control that. The money could be used for hiring consultants, it could be used for building detention basins, it could be used for buying bulldozers.
Councilmember Miller.
I guess I want to get a clarification, because when President King described if we set that parks, the deterioration of the turf and the general green space of parks is a major quality of life issue for the city of Colorado Springs. And in so reversing that trend, we want to appropriate the X amount of dollars to parks watering and mowing of parks. How is that not supporting a major budget, legislative budget determination? I mean, it's a quality of life issue that we hold to be, and this is just an example. How could you, I mean, isn't a major legislative budget determination in the eye of the legislature? Is it in the eye of?
It's in the eye of a reasonable district court judge and the Supreme Court, possibly. I can't tell you if that's a reasonable determination or not. I mean, if that's what council chooses to do and it feels that it is one, then obviously you take action based on it. And if there has to be reasonableness to it, let's say that. If you go too far out on a limb, you're more likely to be challenged as encroaching on the powers of the executive. If the executive goes out too far on a limb, then he too is subject to being challenged on that. And so I can't draw a bright line and say where it is or where it isn't. I've kind of given you the guidelines as best I can, and I understand your argument. I just can't say yes or no for sure on it.
Well, I guess because in that you use that particular example, you did say clearly that wouldn't be. So I'm just wondering what the rationale was when you said that, because you said what you could do then is allocate more to parks operations. Well, that doesn't support our major legislative budget determination of improving the turf and green space in parks to improve the quality of life, because that parks operations money could be used to improve the restrooms at Memorial Park, because that's part of parks operations.
Parks maintenance.
And parks maintenance. So we can't convey that budget determination, that major legislative budget determination, by just appropriating to parks maintenance. That doesn't convey the determination. So I think there's a lot of, like you said, it's not black and white. And
No.
hopefully we'll reach some cooperation so we don't get into this.
And two, I mean, I encourage you to have the dialogue, and there's nothing to prohibit council from expressing its rationale for the appropriations that it's made. Whether, I mean, it doesn't need to necessarily even be in the appropriation ordinance, but if you talk for an hour up here on the day that you adopt the budget, and you say, we're giving more money to parks for parks watering, it does send the message. And ultimately, all of elected officials are answerable to the public. But in terms of purely legalistic interpretation of the charter, if you appropriate more money for parks maintenance, it can be used anywhere and anyhow for parks maintenance.
Right. Councilmember Pico.
I want to come back a little bit to these lines here. I've been somewhat frustrating to hear all the examples being used on the parks, which is actually done to a fairly reasonable level of details. Let's talk about, say, the police department, which has, single largest budget, $82 million, and there are exactly 3 lines in it: salary, operating, and capital outlays. There's no further details on any program underneath. We can't come in there and say, for example, we think we should put more CSOs out there, because we don't have a budget line for CSOs. We have funding changes from some of the specific lines, and some of them are somewhat entertaining that begs a lot of questions. We don't have the details. There is a change, for example, overtime for PD security to city council members for 4 town hall meetings per year per counselor, $6,000. Now, that one begs a lot of questions, given that every request for support from the PD for a council member town hall has been denied So one would assume that there's zero in the budget for 2013, and that $6,000 increase is the total budget for 2014. But we don't know that. We have no budget line for that. So over and over again, we keep talking about, well, you can change this budget line, but there's no budget lines. So how are we supposed to make any kind of
Well,
budget determination
even without the budget,
legally?
even without the budget line, like there's no budget line, well, maybe there is. I don't have the 2014 budget, so I can't say.
Well, I'll
We
tell you
use-
what they
we
are.
use The storm, I know with the police, though, I know that they haven't broken it out according to what you might consider programs. You know, like community policing might be a
See,
program.
that's precisely the point.
And I
They
realize
haven't
that
done
without
any
the
program.
information, you've got an information gap on that. But just like stormwater, presumably, there's nothing broken out for stormwater right now. But if you wanted to add a program of stormwater management and appropriate money, you could. And I would think likewise, if you wanted to add a program in the police department and appropriate money for that program, that it's within your prerogative to do so. Now, hopefully, the information gap will close a little bit more, and we can be hopeful that you'll get more information so that you can see that a little bit better. But that's, again, something that I'll defer to Chief of Staff Newman on.
Councilmember Gabler.
And really, that's all I was going to suggest. I feel like we're going in circles, and I'd really like to hear what the Chief of Staff has to say.
Are we ready for the Chief of Staff, or we have another question? Councilmember Knight. Well, we have one more question.
No, I'll ask later.
Okay. I think we're ready for Laura to come and tell us where we're at.
Mr. Florzak, you did an admirable job here at the podium. President King, President Pro Tem Bennett, and council members, I'm here today to address the specific 7 points in the letter that you wrote to the mayor last week. And if I could, does anyone have a clean copy we could put up here under that projector? Mine has writings all over it. I just wanted to go line by line, starting with number 1. I don't know if you can, oh, good, okay. Oops, okay. Phew. This is with the glasses on. Pursuant to Code 1.2.206B, the Colorado Springs City Code, the council requests the same level of line item detail that is found in the 2013 oh, good, there it is, annual budget and resource allocation binder on the budget detail report for the 2014 budget by last Friday at 10 a.m. in order to perform our legislative duties. As you know, the mayor was traveling last week, and this information, as much as you think it might have been readily accessible, it was not. It is a document that's produced after the finalization of the budget. And up until this point, the level of detail that you've been provided is as much as prior city councils have received from the executive branch. So we didn't do anything different. We didn't hide anything. We gave the same level of detail, and we gave an incredible amount of public information and dialogue with over a 4-day period of time that has never happened before, as I understand it. But with that said, to item number 1, we are prepared to give you that level of detail that I know that Councilmember Knight brought with him. We are prepared to give that to you piecemeal over time. Today, what we're prepared to do by day's end for the following departments, because I did not, our finance department did over the weekend to prepare for the airport, the city attorney's office, the city auditor, city clerk, City Council, Communications, Economic Vitality, the mayor, as well as the entire police department, which is yeoman's work to be able to do that. Now, I did ask a question of Eileen, and she did answer to the best of her ability. I don't know how much involvement she had or feedback from all of you, that even with the police department, and maybe I'll put this up here very quickly just to show you the level of detail, which is a lot. This is just one of about 4 pages that you'll expect to receive from the police. You'll see the level of detail that's provided, the prior years, line by line, but still, this doesn't say patrol, vice, K-9, all the different departments within the police department, but it does break down to significant level of detail. And since I didn't have any other feedback other than knowing you wanted it to look like the book that Councilmember Knight brought, we're working off of this. And so this is what we're going to be able to provide you. So by day's end, those 8 or 9 departments that I mentioned to you will be emailed from our finance department. I know your first meeting, your internal markup session as the Budget Committee is this Wednesday, as I understand it. We are going to attempt to have the majority of the larger departments, particularly fire, I think we'll have by tomorrow, parks within the next couple of days to you. So the majority of the departments you will have to this level of detail. So that's item number 1.
Okay.
Thank you, Sheree, for being helpful.
Okay.
Points 2 and 3, I'm not going to get into this appropriation and governing language. This is real deep water for me, and I think Mr. Florzak I went for about an hour with all of you, and so I'll just skip over those, and if you have questions, he can come back to the podium and answer those. I did want to specifically talk about stormwater number 4 and 5, and I want to say, as it relates to proposing a stormwater appropriation department, we would like to have the opportunity to educate you on how stormwater currently functions within our city government because it's cross-departmental. It all falls within the Public Works Department, but many different departments use stormwater monies. And so we don't know, when you're mentioning number 4, if you mean to create a 6th bucket over and above the 5 we've talked about today, and that becomes administratively very burdensome to us. So we would like some time to be able to dialogue on why you might want what you outline in number 4. And I'll pass on to number 5, and if we want to circle back to number 4, we're certainly welcome to. I think we have mentioned multiple times the flood of September of this year caused in the neighborhood of about $10 million worth of damages to city property. And those were on streets and roads, some bridges, and certainly within our parks and trails system. So with that $10 million, we've been working feverishly with FEMA to apply for grants, which we think that we are going to be successful at obtaining. And with that, typically with FEMA, there's a 25% match. And that 25% match, the math you would know, would be $2.5 million that we would need to pay from city funds in order to get the FEMA grant. So we were going to be coming forward on November 12th anyway, because we just met with FEMA last week, and I have a little asterisk, so I don't want to forget about the state, coming forward to make an appropriation from the general fund to the grant fund of $10 million, and then we were going to ask for a supplemental appropriation for the match of $2.5 million. We just learned last Thursday or Friday that the state is going to pay for 50% of our match, so we only need $1.25 million. That's a huge win, by the way, on behalf of city employees that work very hard on these grant issues. But we know there's at least $750,000, if not more, of parks trails that will not be covered under the FEMA grant because they are unimproved trails. We don't know until we actually get the feedback from FEMA, but we know we can easily spend the $2 million that you outlined out of the 2013 General Reserve Fund balance toward stormwater, specifically as it relates to the flood, which were existing stormwater problems. They were just exacerbated by this particular flood. So I wanted to address item number 5.
If I could just
Yes.
give a little dialogue back to you about that particular issue. The reason why we wanted a separate department allocated strictly to stormwater was because when we went through the budget, because of the detail that we only get 3 line items out of different budgets, we had no idea. For example, you talked about design and making up new capital construction projects that we've already allocated this year for a stormwater project, maybe in Waldo Canyon, for example. We had no way of knowing where that particular item existed in the budget, and so what we want with this concept is to take all the stormwater allocations and put them into one allocation, so when it comes time for us to show Pueblo what we are doing or what we are accomplishing, we have a very dedicated box to say that this is where we are allocating these issues. I think we looked at capital construction and we found $155,000 is what we found was dedicated towards stormwater, and it was insufficient for what we felt was necessary to be doing, and that's why I think this is a really important issue, that we bring those items out of those other budgets and create a specific stormwater budget. That's what we were intending to do. Councilmember Bennett.
Yeah, Laura, I thought we had discussed last week sometime in one of those marathon meetings that you are going to provide for us an identification of what is in the budget already for stormwater and where it's located. I understand you go through multiple departments, but and you told me at that time, I believe, that you felt that it would far exceed $7 million.
It's 25 million, yes.
Yeah, but it would just be nice to know, have those itemized, and what department they're coming out of. At least if we had that, we could show that to our friends in Pueblo to say, this is where it's at, because they're asking us those questions too. And I don't know if you're still working on that.
Was that not released to all of you last week? The
I have
25
not seen it.
Councilmember Gabler.
We did get an email that was a press release from Jared Rigo regarding all the stormwater
All of the
projects.
detail of operational, design, construction, line-level detail?
It wasn't terribly detailed. It was difficult to understand where the money was coming from, but yes, we did receive something.
I can reissue that.
Thank
We
you.
did that in painstakingly detailed, and when I say $25 million, some of that is carryover, and I did my best to mark what was carryover for 2013, not new monies, but will be spent in 14. What is grant contingent, which could happen or not happen. We think it's likely to happen. But there was at least, as I recall, $9 million of new monies in 14 carved out for specific stormwater projects on that. So I need to, I think, reissue that.
Councilmember Knight.
Yeah, one point of order and then a question for you then.
Yes.
So in that 25, the carryover was the entire 8.8 that we appropriated? And I don't have chapter and verse in front of me, but the 2014 budget did show 400 of that got spent in 2013. So that number is probably closer to 21 million because we're only carrying over 4.8.
There's a difference of 400,000, but not 4 million, right?
No, 4 million. 4 million out of that 8.8 got spent in 2000.
I think we'd be hard pressed to have spent $4 million in 13, to be perfectly honest, for the design work, but I'll verify that.
Well, I won't claim to be.
Okay.
No, you might be right. I might be off by a zero again.
Okay.
So, the other thing, let me just, again, President King brought this up on accountability, and you go through the, you do have stormwater across all the departments. You get CIP across all the departments too. And so, this weekend, after my 18 holes in that I had to get, all the rest was going back through the budget book. And so I saw how that was in there and referenced in there. And so if instead of doing a separate department, and this is just off the cuff, so I don't know whether council will agree or not, but if we did a separate category, like CIP of stormwater, would that be easier on your bookkeeping?
I would defer to Cara Skinner as it relates to what is the best way to do stormwater accounting so that it serves us well as it's easy for a layperson to understand. But it wasn't easy for me to understand how much we were spending on stormwater. It took me about 48 hours with our engineers to be able to piece it together. So I do understand the question. I just don't want to build a castle we don't need to that makes it very difficult for us to operate. But I do understand the need to be able to determine how much we're operating. Did you want to comment now as it relates to an appropriation department, or no? No. Yes, you would. She would like to come to the podium.
Thank you. I guess I just would agree. I think that's a good idea. I think we strive to make the budget book understandable and to convey the information that's important. So if stormwater is one of the most important issues to the community right now, we can certainly insert it into the different operating departments or have a summary section someplace. We can do it, we can put the information there.
Okay, I think the critical question is the ability to find it and know where it's being spent, so that if we go forward with some kind of a initiative on O&M and capital construction, we have a way for the general citizen to look and say, in the budget, here is the allocation to O&M, here's the allocation to capital construction, and it's all contained within some legitimate-looking box of understandability, so it's easy for the taxpayer out there and the average citizen to know exactly what we're doing.
And Cara, we can do that with the final budget book, to have a stormwater section within Public Works that everything rolls up into one of those fly pages, I think it's called. Okay.
One more thing.
Okay, Councilmember Gaber.
I did just find that email for the press release, and I sent it to council, and as I'm looking at it, it really does show the amount of money that we'll be spending in 2014. It separates out the money that was appropriated in 2013. It defines things by design, construction. I guess the only thing it doesn't do, which isn't really needed if we're only using it to show our friends in Pueblo, this suffices for that, I think, but it might be helpful, yes, when the budget book's done, to have things separated out in O&M and kind of how Keith was mentioning it. President King is mentioning it.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, good. Any other comments on stormwater?
Well, yeah.
Councilmember Pico.
I think what the only thing that's missing in this memo is the fact that it doesn't, or press release, is it doesn't identify which department it came out of. That's where we have no idea.
Okay.
It was buried in the stuff, and we have no
You
idea.
can't find it, you can't trace it
Can't
back.
find it, can't trace it. Therein is the problem.
Okay, we'll reissue that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if
Okay.
I could mention just a quick, I was writing some notes while we were speaking earlier. Why is council involved in the water expense if it's not a program? And I guess I would just give you my answer, and that is because you have oversight of the utility cost is the reason we engaged you in that regard. Not that we consider it a program, it's just one of your responsibilities. And if I could just go out on a limb here from a pure business perspective, because that's all I know, is I would never reach into a general fund reserve to pay for an ongoing operating expense. It is not sustainable. I would find something else to cut in order to sustain operations from this point forward. So I just caution you in that regard.
Councilmember Bennett.
Could I speak to that?
Yes.
I don't disagree with you. My problem with it, and we're going to continue to work on this, is that the city, this is the way it feels to me, Laura, that the city says there's been 2 increases on rates for water. We're not going to budget for those. We're going to turn that back to you to solve that problem. You didn't do that with the gas increases. You didn't do that with when there was any in the past with wastewater. It seemed like you picked out one and asked us to solve that problem, when it seems like that our job as a utilities board is to set the rates at what is a fair and equitable solution. We've done that with every other item that the city consumes, but for some reason, Parks Water got pulled out separately, and it can, it kind of puts us in a unique situation. That doesn't mean we can't work with utilities to possibly bring you some recommendations or recommendations back to this group, but it seems like a unique way to solve a problem, to say we're not going to budget for the rate increases in this area, yet every other rate increase, like your electric rates and everything, you do budget for.
And I think if I could give an explanation in that regard, and this is with all respect to my friends who work at Colorado Springs Utilities, there's a bit of a public outcry by the friends groups and parks that many parks in the Front Range do not have to pay the level of rate that the general public has to pay on water. And so that they've asked us to be their voice in that regard.
And that's accurate, and that's because we don't have a river here. But so it's the same situation But we'll continue to work with you on that, or I certainly will continue to work with
Thank
you
you.
on that.
Oh, could I interrupt for just a
Sure.
second? I think you need to go back to 5 because you had a stormwater topic, but there were a number of issues on the table.
Okay.
One was 2014. And then I want to circle back and talk with the supplemental
Yes.
appropriation out of 2013. So with regard to number 5 on the letter,
Yes,
it's, the administration will be bringing forward a supplemental appropriation for a stormwater project grant funding out of 2013.
that is correct. The full $10 million to go into the grant fund for the overall cost, and then the $2 million appropriation that will be 1.25 of a match, and $750,000 for those that were not funded by FEMA.
Right, and the only reason I bring it up is because that's a 2013 issue, and we were also talking about 2014 budgeting issues, and so I just wanted to make sure that we had closure on both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think we can collaborate on that one and come up with the right amount from both the legislative perspective and the legislative and executive perspective to get the right amount in there. But I think it's very incumbent upon us to do it this year and appropriate it out of this year's budget, so.
Very good, thank you. And then the last item, Councilmember Pico mentioned as it relates to police coverage at town halls, and I just want to mention that that was true, and that was a decision made that this particular council has significantly more town halls than the prior council, and there was a lot of demand on staff time. However, when it comes to police coverage, Chief Carey felt very strongly that that was the responsibility of CSPD to have a presence within town halls, and wrote specifically a memorandum to President King that I don't know if he copied all council members, to be able to coordinate presence for CSPD at the town halls. Was that shared with everyone? I can make sure that you do
I
get a
don't know
copy
if
of that. So
I-
that's a new development in the last 4 to 6 weeks.
Thank you.
You're
Okay.
welcome. And that's all I have, unless you had any questions.
Did you didn't want to, you said you'd want to address 6 and 7, or do you want to?
I did not want to address 2, I did not want to address 2 and 3 or 6 and 7. So I'm finished now.
That's
No,
fine,
I-
we'll let you address what you want to address.
Only in that I believe that Mr. Florzak did so at length, and it's a little outside of my purview to talk about those particular issues, but
Okay.
I'd be glad to invite him back to the podium.
Okay, that's fine. Councilmember Pico, did you have something else?
I was just going to say that I had absolutely tremendous police department coverage at one of my town halls, because I had it at the police station.
Oh, very good, very good. Glad we could serve you.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Oh, Councilmember Knight.
Yeah, Laura, respect to number 1, thank you very much. I appreciate
You're welcome.
doing all of that, and the speed that you're doing. And as Tom said, you know, conversation is always great. So the door will be open. While we're having our meetings on the 23rd, Wednesday and Thursday, that is the Budget Committee. So just for everybody to know that way ahead, we're going to, plan is to follow the same agenda that we did the budget review in, just go down the same thing. So we'll be starting with overview and then capital improvement plan. We were trying to think to do this over 2 days, understanding for anybody that might be out there, that might be an accelerated schedule. Councilwoman Gabler will not be here on Thursday, so at the end of Wednesday, if there's, in the final hour on Wednesday, if there's something that we didn't hit on hers, you know, we'll jump forward to that. President King is not going to be able to make all day Thursday either. So kind of Wednesday might be, Wednesday afternoon might be a little shuffling. But for all the rest of the council, then, you know, the Budget Committee is only going to kind of come forward and hopefully be an honest broker and present the ideas. We'll have pros and cons, we'll have recommendations, but then the markup on November 5th is going to be for all council. So the good idea cutoff date, as I called it in fast, is not going to end on 8 o'clock Wednesday morning when we start through this. You know, we'll take it all through there, and even after we do our markup on the 5th, if you get a V8 moment after that and want to bring it forward, that's great. Our real deadline is whenever we have to have the draft ordinance over to Ms. Johnson. And what's that, 8 days before, or how many?
Yes, it normally is. However, obviously, this being something important,
Yeah.
we can certainly work with you all on that,
Right.
as we do on other topics for things to be in the agenda packet.
And we'll need, the Budget Committee and draft, we'll be preparing the ordinance to give to that. And so back that off a day or two so that we make sure that we do have all our numbers right and not at the last minute find out that we got a 4 million versus 400K misunderstanding. So conversation through that entire period and until we get to the first reading, because hopefully we don't want to change anything before the first and second readings. But that's kind of the way ahead. And again, thank you very much for that. I think that will be a lot of information on the police department, and Councilwoman Gabler is volunteered to take the lead on that. So she does her deep dive. Hopefully, if there is one or two more things she needs, that we'll get the same reception. But thank you.
You're very welcome.
And some of the questions that we previously asked, I guess we'll get before we start on Wednesday, or will we get that on Wednesday? When will we get some of those questions answered?
The staff is gathering and preparing it as we speak. We have almost all of it put together in one
Okay.
packet, so we'll get to that to you. If not by the end, well, it's getting close to the end of the day, probably tomorrow early.
Okay, great. We really appreciate that. That would be very helpful for us to look at that, so. Okay, great. So this, that concludes that discussion. Do we want a break or